She caught my collar, pulled me close, and whispered words I'll never forget. "You're not escaping tonight." That was the moment everything between us changed. The first time I really noticed her was on an ordinary afternoon, the kind of day you barely remember unless something unexpected happens. She lived right next door, the kind of neighbor everyone admires quietly but never really approaches too closely. Graceful, elegant, carrying herself with a confidence that seemed unshakable. And yet, when you looked closely, there was something else in her eyes. A softness, a hidden loneliness, almost like a secret she carried around but never spoke about. We'd exchanged polite greetings before. A wave across the lawn, a quick, "good morning," when the mailboxes happened to line up. But that day was different. I was just getting home when I saw her struggling with bags of groceries, 2 in each hand, her arms weighed down. Without thinking, I hurried over. "Here, let me help," I said, and before she could argue, I slipped the heavier bags from her hands. She gave me a look that was half relief, half amusement. "You really didn't have to," she said, her voice smooth but tinged with something warm. "I know," I replied, smiling. "But I wanted to." Her perfume caught me off guard, subtle, floral, not overwhelming, but it lingered in the air between us. Carrying the bags inside her house, I noticed how quiet it was. The kind of silence that makes footsteps sound too loud. She thanked me again, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, and for just a second, her fingers brushed against mine as she took one of the bags. It wasn't anything dramatic. Just a touch. But it sent a current straight through me, sharp enough that I almost forgot to let go. "Would you like to stay for a moment?" she asked suddenly, setting the groceries down on the counter. "Just tea, maybe? You look like you could use a break." I hesitated. I didn't want to read too much into it. But the way her eyes met mine, steady, almost searching, made it impossible to refuse. "Sure," I said. "Tea sounds good." She moved around the kitchen gracefully, pouring water into a kettle, her back straight, her movements deliberate. Watching her felt strange, not inappropriate, but intimate in a way I couldn't explain. As though I was stepping into a part of her life no one else really saw. The kettle began to whistle, breaking the silence. She poured steaming water into 2 cups and slid one toward me, her fingers brushing the rim of the porcelain with care. When I lifted my cup, our eyes met again. Neither of us looked away right away. It was in that quiet moment, sitting in her kitchen with the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence, that I realized something had shifted. She wasn't just my neighbor anymore. She was a presence I couldn't ignore, someone who made the ordinary feel charged with meaning. And though I didn't know it yet, that was the first step into a night I would never forget. After I agreed to stay, she motioned me toward the living room, where the soft glow of a single lamp gave the space a warm, inviting feeling. The room was quiet, almost suspended in time, as if it existed in its own bubble away from the world outside. The faint ticking of a clock on the mantel and the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen were the only sounds, yet they didn't feel empty, they felt comforting, grounding. She offered me a seat on the couch, and I noticed the subtle way she adjusted herself to sit closer, though still within polite distance. Her presence had a calm gravity, and I felt it immediately. She handed me the cup of tea she had poured, the warmth seeping through my palms and into my chest, and I realized how small gestures could suddenly feel so intimate. "So, do you often help neighbors with groceries?" she asked lightly, a teasing lilt in her voice. "Not really," I admitted, smiling. "But I guess today I was lucky, or unlucky, depending on how you see it." Her laugh was soft, genuine, and it made the air between us feel lighter, more alive. She leaned back against the couch, the curve of her shoulders relaxed yet elegant, and for a moment, we just looked at each other in quiet recognition, like two people who understood a subtle truth without needing to speak it. As the conversation continued, it shifted seamlessly from casual topics, books we had read, music we liked, to more personal reflections. She spoke about her love for painting, the small studio she kept tucked in the corner of the house, and how it had been years since she'd felt the freedom to really focus on herself. I listened, captivated not just by her words but by the way she spoke them, thoughtful, reflective, and colored with a hint of longing. I found myself leaning in slightly, drawn to the warmth of her presence. Each time our hands brushed while reaching for the teacups, it lingered just a beat longer than necessary, an unspoken electricity sparking between us. Her eyes held mine in a way that was patient yet insistent, and I felt both nervous and calm at the same time, a confusing, thrilling contradiction. Outside, the sun dipped lower, casting a golden hue through the curtains. The shadows shifted across her face, highlighting the gentle curve of her cheek, the soft glimmer of her eyes. I couldn't stop noticing the way she tilted her head when she laughed, the subtle movements that made her feel alive in a way that drew me in deeper than I expected. Time slipped by almost unnoticed. What began as a brief pause over tea had become an evening of quiet companionship, where every word, glance, and movement seemed charged with meaning. The house felt warmer, smaller, as if it were holding us in its own intimate space, away from the judgments and rules of the outside world. By the time I finally stood to leave, I realized I didn't want to. There was a comfort here I hadn't known I was seeking, and a connection forming that neither of us dared to name yet. That shared evening, soft, slow, and unassuming, had planted the first seed of something deeper, something that would grow whether we acknowledged it or not. The evening had settled into a calm rhythm, but the sky outside was restless. Dark clouds rolled in quickly, and before long, rain began to tap against the windows, a steady drumming that filled the quiet corners of the house. She glanced toward the door, then back at me, her eyes soft but mischievous. "It looks like the storm's not letting up any time soon," she said, a hint of amusement in her voice. "I suppose you'll be staying a while longer." I laughed lightly, though my chest tightened in a way I couldn't quite explain. It wasn't the storm that made the air feel charged, it was her. She moved toward the living room closet and returned with a thick, cozy blanket. Without a word, she draped it over the couch, and then, subtly, she shifted closer, her shoulder brushing mine. We sat together under the blanket, a shared warmth spreading between us. I could feel the steady rhythm of her breathing, hear the faintest shift as she adjusted her position, and noticed the quiet way her leg occasionally nudged mine. It was all so subtle, nothing overt, but every small touch carried a weight, a kind of intimacy that neither of us wanted to acknowledge yet. The rain outside intensified, hammering against the roof. Each crash of thunder made me glance at her reflexively. Her presence was a grounding force. Somehow, sitting this close, wrapped in the same blanket, felt both thrilling and terrifying. I caught myself watching the way the light from the lamp played across her face, highlighting the soft curves of her cheek, the gentle lines around her eyes, the quiet elegance in the tilt of her head. She noticed my gaze, I think, though she didn't comment on it. Instead, she adjusted slightly, her arm brushing against mine again, not a handhold, not a hug, but a frictionless, accidental intimacy that left both of us acutely aware of the space between us. "I've always loved storms like this," she said softly, her voice almost drowned out by the rain. "They make everything feel alive, don't they?" I nodded, unable to trust my voice entirely. There was something in the way she spoke, something that invited honesty without demanding it. It made me want to speak, to say the things I hadn't admitted even to myself, that I was drawn to her, to the warmth of her presence, to the quiet magnetism that seemed to radiate from her effortlessly. Minutes passed, yet no one moved. The silence between us became heavier, almost tangible. I could feel her shoulder resting lightly against mine, the subtle shift of her body toward me. Every glance, every accidental touch under the blanket, made my pulse quicken. It was a tension that demanded attention yet couldn't be named aloud, a magnetic pull neither of us wanted to resist but also weren't ready to explore. When the storm finally eased and the rain softened to a gentle drizzle, I realized we had been sitting like this for what felt like hours. Neither of us had spoken much, but the quiet had said everything. It was a moment suspended in time, where proximity became confession, and silence became desire. For the first time, I understood that this connection, subtle and unspoken, was no longer something fleeting. It was already pulling us both toward a place we hadn't yet dared to go, but might soon. By the time the rain softened outside, the atmosphere in the room had shifted from playful tension to something quieter, heavier, almost reflective. She leaned back against the couch, her shoulder brushing mine once again, and for the first time, her eyes carried more than amusement. They carried a trace of vulnerability. I could feel it, a subtle tremor beneath her composed exterior, a quiet honesty she hadn't shared with anyone before. "I haven't really talked about this with anyone," she said softly, her voice low and careful, almost like she was testing the waters. "Sometimes I feel invisible. Even in a marriage that should be comfortable, that should feel secure, I wonder if anyone really notices me anymore." Her words hit me unexpectedly. I had always admired her confidence, her poise, the way she carried herself with grace. But here, in this quiet moment, I saw a different side, a side that was tender, fragile, and achingly human. She wasn't seeking pity. She wasn't complaining. She was simply allowing herself to be seen. I didn't speak immediately. I just listened, letting her words settle around me, letting the warmth of the blanket and the quiet closeness fill the spaces between us. I wanted to say something meaningful, but every word seemed inadequate. Finally, I found the courage to reach out, resting my hand lightly on hers. Her fingers were warm, soft, and for a moment she didn't move. Then, ever so slightly, she let her hand press against mine. It was a small, almost imperceptible gesture, but it carried a world of meaning. Her touch said more than words ever could, that she trusted me, that she felt safe enough to share herself, that she craved connection in a way she hadn't admitted aloud. I notice you," I said finally, my voice quiet, careful. "I notice the little things. The way you laugh, the way you move, the way you see the world. You're not invisible to me." Her eyes softened, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her lips. There was a pause, a shared, almost sacred silence, where either of us moved, where either of us spoke. And in that pause, I felt the unspoken thread between us tighten, connecting us in a way that was tender, intimate, and entirely irreversible. She shifted slightly closer, her shoulder brushing mine more firmly now. I felt the warmth radiating from her, the subtle rhythm of her breathing mingling with mine. It wasn't a kiss, it wasn't a handhold, it was something quieter, something deeper, a recognition of mutual understanding, of longing restrained, of emotions finally allowed space to exist. "I don't usually say things like that," she murmured, her eyes downcast for a moment. "But with you, it's different. I feel like I can be honest, without judgment, without pretense." I nodded, unsure if words could capture the gravity of the moment. So instead, I let my hand remain over hers, letting silence speak for us. Every subtle touch, every glance, every shared breath was more intimate than anything either of us had experienced with anyone else. That evening, I realized that this connection, the slow, quiet pull towards something more, was no longer just fleeting curiosity. It had become real, deep, and undeniable. The tension that had been simmering for weeks was now charged with emotion, with honesty, and with the promise of something neither of us could yet name but both felt in the core of our being. The storm outside had faded to a gentle drizzle, leaving the world beyond her windows blurred and quiet. I had been lingering, unsure whether to leave or stay, my thoughts a tangled mix of desire, caution, and something I didn't fully understand. She had been silent for a while, watching me, and I could feel the intensity in her gaze, calm, steady, yet undeniably charged. I stood up, preparing to finally make my way to the door. Every step felt heavier than it should have, as if the space between us had suddenly become charged with electricity. She didn't move. Her eyes followed me, dark and steady, and there was a flicker of something that made my stomach tighten, urgency, longing, and perhaps a little fear of what might happen next. Just as I reached for the doorknob, a hand caught my collar. Her fingers were firm but trembling, and before I could react, she pulled me slightly closer, her body brushing against mine in a way that made my heart lurch. The scent of her perfume, warm and floral, enveloped me. She leaned in, close enough that her breath brushed my ear, soft and deliberate, carrying the weight of unspoken emotions. "You're not escaping tonight," she whispered, her voice low and husky, filled with a mix of playfulness, desire, and something I couldn't name but felt in every fiber of my being. The words hit me like lightning, and for a moment, the room seemed to shrink until it was only the two of us. My hands froze mid-air, my chest pounding. Her eyes locked onto mine, steady and unwavering, daring me to respond. I felt the warmth of her body so close to mine, the soft pressure of her hand on my collar, and the gentle rise and fall of her breath. It was intimate, electric, and entirely consuming. I wanted to speak, to say something clever or reassuring, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I felt myself drawn into the moment entirely, my attention fixed on the subtle tremor in her fingers, the way her lips parted slightly as she whispered, the quiet intensity in her gaze. Time stretched, every second feeling infinite. The world outside, the fading storm, the rain-streaked windows, the quiet streets, ceased to exist. It was only her, only this moment, only the fragile tension that had been building for weeks. Her hand lingered, not demanding, not desperate, but insistent enough to make me understand the gravity of her feelings. There was longing there, yes, but also vulnerability, an unspoken plea for connection, for recognition, for someone to see her fully and respond not out of obligation, but out of understanding. I realized then that this wasn't about reckless desire. This was about honesty, about admitting something long buried, that we had both noticed, both felt, and both wanted something more, something tender, something human. I didn't move away, nor did I step fully into her embrace. I simply let the moment exist, letting the tension hang thick and alive, savoring the closeness, the warmth, the intensity of the unspoken. And in that suspended heartbeat, I understood, whatever happened next, nothing between us would ever be the same. The air between us was heavy, charged with the intensity of what had just passed. Her hand still lingered on my collar, but neither of us moved beyond that small, deliberate touch. The room felt warmer, yet quieter, as if even the walls were holding their breath. I could feel the pulse of her heartbeat beneath her chest, a subtle rhythm that matched the rapid thrum in my own. She didn't let go, yet her eyes softened, searching mine for something I couldn't name. Desire was there, yes, a palpable force pulling us closer, but there was also hesitation, a fragile awareness of the consequences that would follow if we crossed an invisible line. I took a slow breath, feeling the weight of the moment, the gravity of our unspoken connection. I started, my voice low, careful. I don't want to rush this. I want to feel this properly, not just act on impulse. Her fingers squeezed mine ever so slightly, and she nodded, a small, understanding smile brushing her lips. I don't want that either, she murmured, her voice soft, almost intimate, carrying the honesty I had come to cherish. I want what this really is. Not something fleeting or reckless. Not something we'll regret. We shifted on the couch, settling closer yet careful, under the shared warmth of the blanket. Her shoulder rested lightly against mine, our arms brushing gently. Every movement was deliberate, tender, a silent acknowledgement of what we felt without needing to name it outright. The storm outside had faded completely, leaving only the soft rhythm of distant rain, like a lullaby for our unspoken truths. I rested my hand lightly over hers, feeling the warmth of her skin, the subtle pressure of her fingers. She didn't pull away, she let the connection linger, letting the silence between us speak louder than words ever could. It was a choice, unspoken yet understood, to be together emotionally first, to savor the closeness, the trust, the intimacy that went beyond the physical. Her head tilted slightly toward me, and I felt her breath brush my cheek. It wasn't a kiss, it was a promise, a subtle acknowledgement of the bond forming between us. My chest tightened with the awareness of how fragile and precious this was, a tension balanced between desire and restraint, between the temptation to cross a line and the wisdom to wait. We sat like that for what felt like hours, hands lightly touching, shoulders brushing, hearts beating in quiet synchronization. Every glance, every slight movement, Every unspoken sigh deepened the connection. It wasn't about escaping, it wasn't about surrender, it was about recognition, honesty, and a willingness to honor something rare and real. Finally, she shifted slightly, letting her head rest lightly against my shoulder. I felt the steady warmth of her presence and knew, in that small, human gesture, that the choice we had made, to wait, to respect, to cherish, was already shaping the bond that would define everything between us. It was a moment of quiet understanding, a shared pause that spoke of patience, trust, and an intimacy far deeper than fleeting desire. And in that gentle, deliberate closeness, I realized that this choice, to be tender, to be aware, to truly see one another, was the truest form of connection we could ever share. The night had settled into a quiet, almost sacred stillness. The rain had stopped completely, leaving the world outside damp and glimmering under the soft glow of the streetlights. Inside her living room, the warmth from the lamp and the fading heat from the kettle felt like a cocoon, holding us in a small, private world where nothing existed beyond the gentle rhythm of our breathing and the faint tick of the clock. We remained on the couch, wrapped in the same blanket, our shoulders brushing, her head resting lightly against mine. It wasn't a dramatic gesture, not an overwhelming declaration. It was simple, natural, and infinitely intimate. Every subtle movement, every shared glance, carried a weight that spoke louder than words. It was in this quiet closeness that I realized the depth of what had grown between us, not a fleeting attraction, but a bond that had been carefully nurtured through patience, honesty, and trust. She shifted slightly, lifting her eyes to meet mine. There was a softness in her gaze, an unspoken acknowledgement of everything that had passed between us, the laughter, the lingering touches, the stolen glances, the moments of vulnerability. And in that look, I understood that this was not the end, but a beginning. I'm glad you stayed, she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Even if it's complicated. I'm glad. I nodded, my hand brushing lightly over hers again. Me too, I admitted. I've never felt this before. Not just with someone older, or more experienced, with anyone. Her smile was gentle, tinged with a quiet warmth that made the space around us feel even smaller, more personal. She leaned back slightly, resting her head fully against my shoulder now, and I could feel the steady, soothing rhythm of her heartbeat. I adjusted slightly, draping an arm around her, the gesture natural, protective, and tender. The intimacy between us didn't need words. Each shared breath, each lingering touch, each quiet acknowledgement of the other's presence conveyed everything we had been feeling for weeks. There was no rush, no expectation, only the pure, human connection of two people recognizing each other fully and allowing themselves to exist together without pretense. I could feel the weight of the evening, the storm outside, the tension, the whispers, the restraint, all dissolve into a quiet contentment. This was what mattered: honesty, presence, and the gentle acknowledgement of a bond that could not be ignored. Her hand tightened slightly on mine, and I squeezed back, a silent promise that we would navigate the complexity together, whatever it might bring. For the first time that night, I allowed myself to truly relax, to let go of hesitation or fear. Her warmth against my shoulder, the soft brush of her fingers against mine, the subtle closeness that had grown into something unshakable, it all felt right, natural, complete. We sat like that for a long while, the world outside fading into insignificance. And as the night deepened, I realized that what had started as curiosity, fascination, and subtle attraction had blossomed into something far richer, a genuine, tender connection that respected boundaries yet acknowledged desire, that embraced emotional honesty while celebrating human closeness. In that quiet, unassuming moment, I understood that the story wasn't about forbidden temptation. It was about discovery, intimacy, and the kind of connection that lingers long after the storm has passed. And as I sat with her, shoulder to shoulder, hand in hand, I knew we had found something worth holding on to, a beginning that was both gentle and unforgettable.